Welcome to BBC International News. First I will tell you the news title and then the details. Breaking news: Hamas says it is reviewing Israeli proposal on ceasefire deal. Great news: Gaza war. Where does Israel get its weapons? Top news: U.S. military stockpile in Israel. Update news: Iran-Israel war highlights. Knowledge of enemy's methods should be on agenda, says Iran's supreme leader. Iran-Israel war live. 2 terror attacks in Judea, Samaria since morning. Listen to the news title so far, now listen to the details.
Hamas says it is reviewing Israeli proposal on ceasefire deal. The statement came as anticipation was growing of an Israeli invasion of Rafah, where more than 1 million Gazans have been displaced. Hamas said on Saturday that it was reviewing a new Israeli proposal for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, a move that comes amid efforts to break a deadlock in the talks between the armed group and Israel. The statement came as anticipation was growing of an Israeli invasion of Rafah, a city in southern Gaza where more than 1 million people have been displaced. Humanitarian groups have warned that such an offensive would have catastrophic consequences for civilians. In a statement, Khalil al-Hayya, a senior Hamas official, said the group had received an Israeli response to a proposal it delivered to Egyptian and Qatari mediators 2 weeks ago. Mr. al-Hayya did not provide any details included in the Israeli proposal, but he said Hamas would respond to it after the group finished studying it. On Friday, a delegation of Egyptian officials visited Israel in an attempt to advance the negotiations between Israel and Hamas, according to an Israeli official familiar with the visit, who spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to communicate with the media. In recent weeks, the negotiations aimed at achieving a ceasefire and the release of hostages held in Gaza have stalled amid disputes about an Israeli withdrawal of forces and the length of a halt in the fighting. Hamas has demanded a permanent ceasefire, whereas Israel has expressed openness to a temporary pause. Another key sticking point is whether Israel will allow displaced Palestinians to return to the north. Hamas officials have said Palestinians should be able to go back en masse, while Israeli officials have said Israel wants to put limits on who can return, where and how. The impasse has left Palestinians in Gaza to continue to suffer through Israel's pulverizing bombing campaign, which has caused destruction throughout the territory and left more than 34,000 dead, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The ministry's figures do not differentiate between combatants and civilians. It has also prevented Israeli hostages from reuniting with their families, many of whom have become increasingly critical of the Israeli government's failure to secure their loved ones' freedom. Calls for ceasefire talks have gained urgency as Israel signals that it may go ahead with its invasion of Rafah. Earlier this week, an Israeli military official said that if Israel were to begin an invasion of Rafah, Israeli-designated humanitarian zone along the coast would be expanded to take in more civilians. He spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. The comments were among the first indications of the Israeli military's plans for civilians if it were to launch a major ground offensive in the area. Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken is expected to travel to Israel next week, a trip that would come as the United States has urged Israel not to undertake a major military operation in Rafah. Israeli officials have repeatedly said that entering Rafah was necessary in order to fight Hamas battalions there, but Israel's allies have expressed grave concerns about what an invasion would mean for people who have crowded into the city, many of them living in makeshift tents in large encampments. Gaza war. Where does Israel get its weapons? Western governments are coming under growing pressure to halt arms sales to Israel over how it is waging the war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Israel is a major weapons exporter, but its military has been heavily reliant on imported aircraft, guided bombs, and missiles to conduct what experts have described as one of the most intense and destructive aerial campaigns in recent history. Campaign groups and some politicians among Israel's Western allies say arms exports should be suspended because, they say, Israel is failing to do enough to protect the lives of civilians and ensure enough humanitarian aid reaches them. On Friday, the UN Human Rights Council backed a weapons ban, with 28 countries voting in favor, 6 against, and 13 abstentions. The US and Germany, which account for the vast majority of Israel's arms imports, both voted against. Germany said it did so because the resolution did not explicitly condemn Hamas. The war was triggered by Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th, which killed about 1,200 people, mainly civilians, according to Israeli tallies. More than 33,000. U.S. military stockpile in Israel. Israel is also home to a vast U.S. arms depot set up in 1984 to pre-position supplies for its troops in case of a regional conflict, as well as to give Israel quick access to weapons in emergencies. The Pentagon shipped about 300,000 155mm artillery shells from the War Reserve stockpile ammunition Israel to Ukraine following the Russian invasion. Stockpiled munitions at the depot have also reportedly been supplied to Israel since the start of the Gaza war. Iran-Israel war highlights. Knowledge of enemies' methods should be on agenda, says Iran's supreme leader. Iran-Israel war highlights. The U.S. House passed $61 billion in fresh aid for Ukraine on Saturday, ending a 6-month political impasse during which Kiev's stockpiles dwindled in its war against Russia. The Ukraine aid will be combined with funding for Israel and Taiwan, for a foreign assistance package totaling $95 billion. Iran and Israel appeared to step back from the brink of broader conflict as lawmakers in the United States approved new Israeli military aid on Saturday despite growing criticism of its allies' war in Gaza. Iran downplayed Israel's reported retaliation for its unprecedented drone and missile attack, tamping down fears that escalating attacks between the archenemies could tip over into a broader war in the Middle East. On April 20th, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on April 20th has requested Palestinians to unite in Gaza, following hours-long talks with Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh in Istanbul. AFP reported his office as saying, reports arrived that a person was killed and 8 wounded in an overnight explosion at an Iraqi military base on Friday night, AFP reported officials as saying. According to report, the blast hit the Kalsu military base in Babylon province south of Baghdad. This is a base where regular army, police, and members of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces, or Hashd al-Shabi, are stationed. With United States vetoed a Palestinian request for full United Nations membership, President Mahmoud Abbas, in a recent interview with the official Rafah news agency, said that the Palestinian Authority will reconsider bilateral relations with the U.S. Israel carried out airstrikes against Iran, ABC News reported, citing a U.S. official. The sounds were heard over the city in Isfahan, adding that several miniature UAVs were shot down, Al Jazeera cited Mehr news agency. However, the official could not confirm whether Syria and Iraq sites were hit as well. The attack was said to be a retaliatory strike on Iran less than a week after Tehran's drones and missiles attack. Following this, Iran fired air defense batteries and shut down flight operations in several cities, including Tehran, Shiraz, and Isfahan, which were later lifted. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amirabdollahian, however, said, "Ran Israel war live. Israel holds Palestinian economy captive, say analysts. The Gaza war is speeding up Israel's annexation of the Palestinian economy, say analysts, who argue it has been hobbled for decades by agreements that followed the Oslo peace accords. While the Israel-Hamas war raging since October 7th has devastated swathes of Gaza, it has also hit the public finances and wider economy of the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Israel is tightening the noose on the Palestinian Authority, which rules parts of the West Bank, by withholding tax revenues it collects on its behalf, economist Adel Samara told AFP. Palestinian livelihoods have also been hurt by bans on laborers crossing into Israel, and by a sharp downturn in tourism in the violence-plagued territory, including a quiet Christmas season in Bethlehem. Iran's foreign minister downplays Israeli retaliation, compares it with child's play. A day after Iran's state media reported explosions were heard after small drones were successfully shot down, Foreign Minister Hossein Amirabdollahian downplayed the Israeli retaliation. Speaking to NBC News in a Friday interview, Abdollahian said, as quoted by AFP, "What happened last night was no attack. It was the flight of 2 or 3 quadcopters, which are at the level of toys that our children use in Iran," he added, saying, "As long as there is no new adventure on behalf of the Israeli regime against Iran's interests, we will have no response." Earlier, the U.S. media had quoted officials as saying that Israel had carried out strikes in retaliation for Tehran's drone and missile barrage that were fired at Israel last weekend.